Here we are, Chapter 16 of Graham the Gargoyle, First Flight. The two of them managed to sneak back into their homes, thinking their parents none the wiser. Graham slipped in through the open window. A quick peek into the living room told him his father had still not returned home, and his mother had fallen asleep on the couch. Returning to his room, he curled up in his bed. He clutched the spell scroll, knowing he and Ott would have to face the consequences for what they had done. Graham fell asleep quickly, his mind dwelling not at all on tomorrow. Dawn arrived, and Graham sprang out of bed. He dashed into the kitchen, his mission clear. Today was his first flight. He still felt uncertain about his success, but he knew he owed it to himself to try. He gathered up the necessary utensils and ingredients to make his family's favorite breakfast, brambleberry pancakes. It was really his favorite, but it was the only meal his mom trusted him to make unsupervised. As he poured the batter onto the skillet, his father walked in. The gargoyle rubbed his eyes and rolled his shoulders to loosen his muscles. "Graham, I need to talk to you about what happened last night." From his father's serious expression, he knew it wasn't about the spell scroll. Graham eyed the pancakes. He'd have to flip them in a minute or two. He put down the spatula and walked over to his dad. He wrapped his tiny arms around him at the waist. "I know, Dad. He's gone." His father was taken aback by his son's display of affection, something the two of them rarely did anymore. He stumbled over his words as he attempted to sound reassuring. He loved you very much." Graham buried his head in his father's stomach. "I know. I'm so proud of him." His father patted his wings gently. Graham looked up at his father's eyes. For the first time, he witnessed him shedding a tear. "I miss him already," Graham sniffled, knowing he was about to cry. "We all do, son." His father's large arms closed in around him, and he squeezed Graham tight. They stood together for a long time, long enough for Graham's mother, along with Flynn, to march into the kitchen and ask what was burning. After putting out the minor fire, the family prepared for Graham's first flight together. The whole village had turned out for the rite of passage, even the widow Stemmel, who rarely left her home. Graham stood among a group of 15 fellow gargoyles. All were about to officially test their wings for the first time. The canyon stretched out before them was located to the west of the village, a good 15-minute walk from the heart of town. The council was there along with most of the town's merchants. Several temporary booths had been constructed to sell food and drinks. The group of young gargoyles about to prove themselves clustered together 4 yards away from the edge of the canyon. Knockabout Canyon, as it was called, cut deep, the floor of the canyon a good 100 feet below. Snaking through the landform was the Isis River. It flowed toward New Asgard. If one wanted, they could follow it all the way to Cascade's capital city. The roar of the rushing waters below could be heard even all the way up at the top of the cliff. With the recent rain, the river was swollen and rough. To successfully complete their first flight, the young gargoyles had to launch from the precipice and stay aloft. Past first flighters who had not succeeded had splashed into the river to be washed ashore, bruised and humiliated. Graham inspected those around him. They were all a few inches taller, and their wings at least twice the size as his. There was a nervous air buzzing among the group. Blord raced out of the crowd and took his place, a bandage secured to his nose. He glared at Graham, but held his insults in check. Elder Rolf approached the apprehensive flyers. Graham couldn't recall Rolf ever missing a first flight. He was the oldest in the village and had the wrinkles to prove it. He was there to individually bless each new flyer before they took their leap of faith. Seeing how weathered the gargoyle looked this year, Graham wondered why Rolf had not crossed over yet. He was much older than Graham's grandfather. Why was he still around and his grandfather not? He would ask his father after the flight. They formed a line in the order that had been determined by the council. Graham was third to last, wedged between the chubby gargoyle Skinnerd and a reedy, thin Logan. Blord was fifth in line. The bully had his fellow partner in crime, Reginald, behind him. Both looked back at Skinnerd and gave a knowing nod. Skinnerd whispered to Graham, "Stinks to be you right about now. All sort of grief happening with you today. Total failure here, and then a terrible punishment for taking that spell scroll." Graham ignored the gargoyle and faced forward. Rolf blessed the first in line. Plym, one of the 3 blue-skinned gargoyles in his class, launched off the cliff. Graham watched, catching himself holding his breath. The skinny gargoyle dropped out of sight despite flapping his wings with gusto. Had he fallen to the river below? A cheer of relief erupted from the crowd as Plym flew back up into view, his wings flapping furiously. He streaked over to the other side and landed dangerously close to the cliff edge. He waved back at his fellow classmates and awaited their arrival. The next 3 gargoyles proved to be equally successful, taking their place beside Plym with only slight differences in execution. Klemp, Climp botched his landing, skidding across the ground face first. Warla flew smoothly and performed a dramatic bow when she made it across. Ferg, Graham's classmate who was almost as smart as his sister, flew the straightest. Blord approached the cliff. Rolf blessed him. The bully took one last look back at Graham and took to the air. He flew with confidence, but with not much style. He made it across, and then gave Graham a smug look. As Reginald launched, Graham searched the crowd for aught. The troll had promised he would be there, but had he been grounded by his father for being out so late? He saw his family behind him in the crowd. Flynn caught his eye and waved, all smiles. He smiled back and waved half-heartedly. In the crowd of orange and blue gargoyles, his yellow-skinned friend should have stood out. He couldn't find him. Suddenly the crowd groaned. Graham redirected himself to the canyon again. Reginald waved at the crowd on the far side, clearly having made safe passage. Tapping Skinner's shoulder in front of him, he asked, "What happened?" "Winslow didn't make it. He hit the river." "You didn't hear the splash?" Skinner's voice sounded annoyed. "Pay attention, Graham." A chill ran down his spine. Winslow had huge wings and was all muscle. If he hadn't flown... The next 4 gargoyles all stayed in the air, displaying a broad degree of skill and grace. The crowd roared in excitement with each success. Graham laughed when Nico flew heavily to the right and bobbed up and down. Still, his energetic classmate made it. There were only 2 more ahead of him. Graham searched for Ott again, this time scoping out the small crowd on the other side of the canyon. Blord cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled at Skinner, "Show Graham how it's done, big guy! Whoop!" Just as Graham was about to give up searching for his troll friend, he saw a mud pie arcing toward the noisy bully from somewhere in the crowd on the other side. The large projectile smashed into the side of Blord's head. The bully froze, mud dripping from his horned scalp. He whirled around to try and spot his assailant. Graham knew that Ott had managed to make it to his first flight. He focused his attention on the canyon ahead. Skinner received his blessing and jumped into the air. The lumpy gargoyle puffed out his chest as his large wings beat up and down. His weighty body dropped out of view. There was a squeal and then a faint splash. The crowd again groaned. Graham fumbled up to the cliff, not daring to look down. He swallowed and closed his eyes. His lips moved faintly as he whispered a mortal prayer. He didn't hear a word of Rolf's blessing, but felt the ancient gargoyle's rough fingers nudge his arm. "Time to fly," Rolf said. Graham tested his wings. He shifted his feet up, opened his eyes, and pushed off. He dropped like a stone, the cool, damp air rushing past him. He flapped his wings rapidly. The river raced toward him. A defeated Skinner was being fished out of the waters downstream. Graham refocused. He had to fly. He had done it with Ott in tow. Why was he still heading toward the river? If anything, he was beating his wings far harder than last night. Panic gripped him as he approached the waters below. He closed his eyes and braced for impact, taking the coward's route. He'd never live this down. Blore would pick on him with twice the spite. Flynn and his father would be ashamed. And what would his grandfather think? Would he even know his grandson had failed? He forced the crippling thoughts out of his mind. The icy water of the Isis River would churn him up and spit him out. Gargoyles hated getting wet. Graham absolutely detested it. He thought of the impressive splash he would make. Only he didn't. He didn't slam into the waters below. The chilly river did not envelop him. Confused at not having hit bottom, he opened his eyes. The Isis River, along with the canyon, lay far below. The crowd of onlookers were tiny ants from his new vantage. Graham was in flight, actually soaring above them all. The clouds were almost within reach. He glanced back at his puny wings to see only a blur. They were a flurry of movement. He coasted toward the village, his face plastered with joy. He knew he was supposed to come down and land with the others, but he lingered, flying over first the village and then Mount Prometheus, well distant from the dark ash it belched. He smiled at spying Malcolm Parsons' statue atop his plateau. His muscles ached slightly, but not nearly as much as he thought they would. He kept a steady course, indulging not at all in steep dives or loop-de-loops. He knew he needed to get back, but he veered right to pass over one last landmark. Below, a sea of green flew by. Abruptly, the treetops vanished, and he coasted over the clearing holding the summoning stone. He slowed his wings, allowing the warm currents around him to lead the way. His thoughts turned neither to how much courage he had, nor to the look that must be on Blord's face at his feet. He thought of his grandfather, and how proud he would be. And Graham suddenly knew that his grandfather had been witness to his first flight. Even from his church on earth, there was a connection between them. Their bond crossed all dimensions. It tugged at his heart, filling him with hope and sadness. He let escape a single tear, watching it drop to the ground below until he lost sight, an immediate prisoner to gravity. The morning sun burned brightly. Graham circled over the clearing twice before returning to his family, friends, and home. Now, I do want to read the author's note. It's a very short one. Okay. Almost 14 years separate this revised edition of Graham 1 from its original. Graham the Gargoyle First Flight was written on January 1st, 2000 and came in at 14,267 words. It was an experiment to see if I could write my first novel in one day. I succeeded. Now flash forward to 2013. Graham 2 had been published for a year, and I had just finished writing the first draft of Graham 3. Upon rereading the first Graham, I could see the problems with my inexperienced writing. I vowed to rework the book. With both the second and third volumes in the series over 75,000 words, Graham 1 felt slight. Graham the Gargoyle, Book 1, Graham's Grief is the new title. Its alliterative title now syncs up with the other books in the series. I set to work rewriting the book. I didn't change the events of the chapters. I did add 2 new chapters that embellished how lonely Graham was feeling and helped justify why he left with his grandfather. In addition, the dialogue was tightened up and scenes were smoothed out so that transitions flowed. I found it easy to add hints of what was coming in the next 2 volumes. It came together incredibly fast. While it was no one-day affair, I did get the 22,500-word novel done in 5 days of intense creativity. So I grew the story by 8,756 words, and not one of them feels like padding. It was a very rewarding experience. The differences and signs of growth with my writing were easy to spot. I'm so pleased with the result. For those of you new to Graham's world, Books 2 and 3, Flynn's Folly and Ott's Ordeal, are available now. With Books 4 and 5, Larone's Lament and Blord's Burden in the planning stages, I'm looking forward to many years of adventures with Graham and his supporting cast. I'm hoping to rope in a whole bunch of Gargoyle groupies with this revamped edition of Graham 1. Please visit my website to keep up on the new books in this charming series. So that's it, guys. That was Book 1. I really want to encourage you to think about downloading Book 2 and 3 because it really develops the character of Graham and his cast much more. You're going to see Graham and Flynn kind of work through the second book as the main characters. And in the third book, it's going to be Graham, Ott, and Flynn all offering their points of view on the story as the chapters kind of alternate between their perspectives. I got to say that Book 3 is one of my favorites because you see the natural outcome of what Blord's character is doing. He's truly a mean bully in the first book. The second book, you start to see glimmers of hope in his character. And the third book helps to kind of complete his character transformation to not the most noble person or gargoyle, but certainly much nobler and doing more of the right thing than he does in the first book and the second. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this read aloud, and we'll think about checking out Books 2 and 3.